so much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vinay Kumar. I am part of Startup BD team at AWS. Today, we have an amazing panel for helping startups grow and scale. In this conversation, we'll talk about the challenges and the strategies that startups have successfully adopted to scale and grow their business. At the end of this conversation, we would want you to leave with a fresh perspective, a new idea, or a new business strategy that you can implement at your role in terms of growing your startup. Yeah. So, and the flow for the event is, we'll start with the panel introduction, then we'll have the Q&A, and at the end, we'll open the floor for questions. Yeah. So over to Jinu for.
Thanks, Vinay. And for an introduction, I would say that I work for Sendbird in the sales engineering, and my team helps our customers get the kind of success we want them to get, implementing the chat platform that we have. Now, coming to the solutions that we offer, philosophically, we are a conversations platform which covers everything from chat to live streaming to video calls to voice calls and the different uses of that. So in your day-to-day life, I think everybody sitting here would be using one of the 4 or 5 apps that I'm going to say: Paytm, Practo, Ola, and Bharat Matrimony. You might have used one of these apps at some point in time. They are all being supported by Sendbird.
Perfect. Thank you guys for having me here, and it's a real pleasure. And quick intro about me. I'm Shiva. I handle the new business for AppsFlyer, and this gives us a unique opportunity to talk to the new, young, vibrant startup community in India. And AppsFlyer is a global leader in the attribution and analytics space. If you look at your smartphone today, probably 70% of the apps would be powered by AppsFlyer for their attribution and analytics. And we have been successfully doing this for the last 12 years, where the marketeers have been using us and banking on the data given by AppsFlyer to grow their app strategies. And looking forward to the discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Somindu. I'm the Chief Product Officer at CAMS. CAMS is the #1 mutual fund RTA in this country. We manage around 70% of the mutual fund assets in this country. And CAMS also is in a lot of other sectors and a little less known ones, like CAMS is a payment platform called CAMS Pay. We are an insurance repository. We have an account aggregator business and a CRA business for the NPS, which is the National Pension Scheme. So it's a very unique position that CAMS in, because on one hand, it's a company which is 30 years old, has been in the mutual fund industry right from the beginning. And on the other hand, it is setting up a lot of new businesses. And from that angle, we understand the challenges that startups face and the kind of challenges they have in scaling up. So look forward to this discussion.
So let's start with you, Shiva. Since you work with the AppsFlyer and you help startups acquire customers and optimize their spend in terms of that acquisition. So what are the key sort of app marketing ecosystem trends that you are seeing? How are people leveraging those trends, and how are people growing and scaling their startup?
I think there is no doubt here in terms of fintech leading the ecosystem or the startup ecosystem today. And there have been a lot of changes that we started observing in the way that the end customers interact or the marketeers approach their acquisition strategies. We did a detailed research of 8,000 different apps and looking at 8 billion different installs that has happened over a year. And we also understood that 63% of users which are there on fintech apps today are acquired from non-organic sources. And one more interesting trend that we also started observing is out of the majority of non-organics that are happening today are coming from the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And this is also a testament of the vibrant demographic dividend that we have, right? That's one piece. When we see that there is scale and growth, there is also fraud that creeps into your growth. And this is something that I would call out for every marketer to look out for, because the moment you start spending on resources or channels where you're exposed to fraud, your analytics and your strategies are going for a toss. And again, a question to the audience probably, what is the leading sector in India which is exposed to fraud? Probably, again, no prizes for guessing, but that's fintech. And out of the 100% fraud that has happened in India, 50% of fraud happens in fintech ecosystem itself. So there's a lot of money that is being burnt on the fraud today. And again, when we say fraud, these are the fraudulent installs or in-app events that mimic a real user behavior, and even marketeers fall for it today, right? Obviously, there are trends which also talks about how different traditional companies are moving towards app-first approach. This was probably not there in 2020. Probably this was a silver lining that COVID has given us. And a lot of traditional banks, financial institutions are moving towards an app-first approach. And we'll also talk about the retention rates that we have, the uninstall rates, because there's only a certain amount of attention span that you can get from any customer today. Right? That's it. Thank you.
Jinu, your observation about these trends?
Yeah, so talking about the observations, I have been hearing to different panels in the morning, and I've been hearing about the challenges actually which we have in terms of the regulations in India. But I have a deeper view of different other geographies with the help of Sendbird, where we have been helping. And there are clearly a couple of trends I can tell you. One of them is people are moving away from pure transactions, and and this is for fintechs by the way, and they are moving towards identity-based transactions. Now, what is an identity-based transaction? Identity-based transaction is, if let's say Shiva is on an app from, let's say, BharatPe, Paytm, any one of that. People want to see what their peers are doing. They want to see their behavior, and they want to emulate that behavior. And the research says, and I can quote this from one of our customer, PicPay, which is a replica of Paytm in Brazil. The CEO has said that if my user is coming back on my app and spending time here socially, there is a 53% more chance that they are going to use my app. Ultimately, you are building an app because you want economy of scales. So this is one thing which is very, very heavily getting adopted. Second thing what I have seen is moving away from SMS. Now SMS as an industry is huge. We all think what's there in an SMS. I can tell you I'm talking to somebody in Philippines today who spend $105 to $227,000 per month just to send out SMSs, and they are also in the likes of Paytms and BharatPe. Now, that's not a small amount when you talk about annually. And on top of that, if you follow the Asian trends, Singapore government last week has said that any transactional message with a hyperlink would be tagged as likely scam. I have an example with me on my phone. I got something from HDFC. I was coming here from Singapore, so I needed some money, and I was doing some transactions. And apparently, all Singaporean banks have already, complied with it. But HDFC had a link in it, and boom, it comes as not from HDFC, but from likely scam. People are definitely moving away from SMSs. So all the budding fintech owners and people who are working on that side, I would say that start engaging your customer base on your app one way or another, especially when there is also talks about micro lending and going into villages and going into the sector where people are not highly educated, blue collar workers and all. They need more engagement, by the way, and trust comes only through mutual engagement and community engagement.
So, Somendu, you are building multiple new businesses at CAM. So, in your role, what are the challenges that you face, and what are the other challenges that the startup face while growing and scaling?
Who are leading companies and who are developing apps for the fintech sector, you have to keep in mind that your app, your user journeys have to be very agile and very fast changing. So one of the trends that we are seeing in the customers that we serve is they are more and more moving to single code base, multiple deployment across platform kind of a trend, where people are taking more and more frameworks like Ionic or Flutter or whatever. Because earlier, everybody wanted to do native, everybody wanted to develop for platforms, but more and more in the fintech specific sector, people are moving to these single platform developments because that gives them the speed and that lets them make these regulatory changes, which are coming thick and fast, specifically in the fintech. Now, in terms of challenges, I think there are three kinds of challenges that startups face when they want to scale. And I will answer this question both as somebody who is leading new businesses and also as CAMS, which is an MII in the capital markets, right? The first challenge is about getting real data to test your hypothesis. For a startup, it is important that you understand the market and you don't not only understand your customer psychology, the user journeys, don't only optimize for that, but you optimize with real data. And given the variety in Indian ecosystem, Indian customer ecosystem, the use cases, the corner cases are much beyond what you and I can sit and think in a room, right? So getting access to real data from the MIIs, and government is doing a lot of work around that. You have innovation labs being done by both the regulators, the RBI, SEBI, PFRD as well. You have regulatory sandboxes, innovation sandboxes, where you can get access to that kind of real data, and you must use it so that your applications that you're developing, the use cases that you're developing are real actual world, solving real actual world problems. The second challenge that a startup faces usually is about credibility, right? Because you are working in fintech sector, the data that you want access to and you want to deal with is extremely sensitive. If you want to work with a big bank, a big organization, they have to be very sure that your practices are such that the data that they are giving you access to is secure. It is not going to leak. You are not going to misuse it. So the credibility that you have and the practices that you follow to establish credibility and your ability to handle sensitive data is something that you have to establish and you have to do well, right? And third, I think, which is a very generic point, is talent, right? When you are selling a story, usually to attract talent so that you can build to scale, right? You can have a great idea, you can be solving a real problem, but solving that problem at scale, at India scale, is something that, you know, you will have to figure out early on, because that is where the architecture, the robustness of your platform and your ability to be trusted by the behemoths who will work with you with their data is critical. So in summary, three things: credibility, access to real data, and ability to scale. I think these are the challenges that fintechs have.
For Shiva and Jinu, how important is for a startup to acquire and retain and engage the existing set of customers? And what sort of initiatives that we can drive to engage with the customers?
Sure. So I was talking to Shiva just before this session, and he gave me some important vital information that in the month of January there was $1.25 billion of $1.2 billion of investment which has come into the fintech space in India. The overall fintech or the overall startup?
Overall
startup space. Okay. Now that's a lot of money coming in, and he's saying that it typically comes in the range of $1 billion every month in India, in the Indian market. So that's a lot of money, and in the Spider-Man movie they have said that with a lot of power, great power comes great responsibilities. If you are not being responsible with it, what happens is you lose customers. There is a study done in 2021 which says that the loyalty of your customers is all-time low on the apps. I'm talking about apps, generally any apps. It could be any apps. 2018, it was around 40%. It dwindled to 23% in 2020, and it's further down. And with all the the Gen Z and the millennial phenomena, the patience is low. They will be not so engaged with you. So the whole thing is, there are two things which are quite important: customer retention, as you mentioned, and customer engagement. Customer engagement, requires you to engage them in multiple ways. First of all, it's their own engagement, like creating a community for them. Think about that. Because, as I said, you cannot build trust in the customers. Customers get trust from their own peers. Remember that. So the community effect would be very, very important. Second thing is when you engage them for the right, like if they are in the right cohort or they are getting the right offers, and that can be for any business, including fintechs, that I want to give you a right offer. Those offers should be right, and the cohort should be decided very, in a very precise way from the data slicing and dicing. And then the third piece is retention. For retention, there is a Barnes study which very clearly says that if you can improve your customer support just by 5%, and nobody takes it very seriously, just by 5%, it can improve your business revenue by 25%. So it's an important thing. Retention is important, and that comes from customer supportability, customer delight, which comes from being very, very available in terms of support. Now support has challenge. The challenge is called warm bodies. Everybody here wants to cut the warm bodies. You don't have that many employees. In fact, people are laying off nowadays. So to cut down warm bodies, you have to find out ways where you can use interactive ways, which are probably AI driven, probably smart enough, and then bring the human intervention at a point where it is suitable. So I think these are some of the ways where things can be better and improved.
I will probably take a different approach because these three things that you've asked, how do you retain, engage, or grow, or acquire users, right? I'll probably pick one use case in all these three. Again, assuming that we are talking about a fintech startup, which is in the early stage or the early growth stages. The first and foremost important thing is the onboarding journey. I know that we used to talk about customer experience as a piece for all the other verticals, but not in fintech for a longer time. But I think this is non-negotiable. What we have seen in the onboarding flows is the larger the flow, the tedious the flow, the more work you ask your end customer to do, the larger the drop-offs that we see. Right? The more seamless user experience that you create for them to onboard your app and help them understand and navigate your app will help you in terms of your higher conversion rates. Second, once you have a user on board, you need to understand what are those key metrics that you want to optimize for. We usually call it a North Star metrics or a hook metric that you'd want to look for. Again, I can give you an example. One of the customer who was working, they started looking at 3 different data points. 1, the source through which the user is coming. 2, the in-app events. 3, the retention rates. One of the inputs that they could drive from this data is a user who does a bank linking has a higher retention rate or engagement rate than a user who doesn't. And this is one of the hook metric they wanted to optimize all their campaigns for. Again, we have a lot of subsections inside the fintech vertical today: lending, micro lending, crypto, cards for teenagers. You have n number of verticals now, and you have to figure out what is that North Star metric that you would want to optimize for, and don't use gut as a parameter to run your campaigns. Third, most important is, like we all know that there are close to 80 to 90 different apps in each of your smartphones today. And probably you're using only 9 to 10 apps on a daily basis. There is a very less attention span, and we see that 54 to 60% of people uninstall the app on the very same day that they install. And let's not even talk about the day 30 retentions. That's close to a single digit almost. It's very important not only to acquire but to re-engage. I would concur with what the co-panelists told already. We have seen an uplift if you have a precise measured retargeting, and again I'm very consciously using this word measured retargeting because you can't retarget everybody. You have to have a measured retargeting approach, and we have seen 64% increase in a day 30 retention if you do a measured retargeting. But the sad fact is only 20 to 25% of startups, or specifically fintech startups, believe in retargeting as a strategy for their app growth. These are the 3 things: onboarding, getting your metrics right, and having a right sound retargeting strategy. These are the 3 probably would help you to achieve those 3 tick marks of engaging, retaining, and growing your users.
So over the last decade, government has done a lot of work in terms of building digital public goods, your UPI, Aadhaar stack, India stack, and we are hearing a lot about account aggregator also. So Swendu, if you can throw some light on account aggregator and what sort of opportunities it will create for fintechs and founders in that space.
I think we were talking to somebody who is part of the founding team, Sharad Sharma, on about account aggregator, and he said a very interesting thing, right? He said account aggregator is part of India's larger goal of becoming a product first company, product first country. And for that, flow of data is very, very important, right? And what account aggregator does is basically democratizes flow of data. You are the owner of your data. You don't have to ask from somebody, request somebody, put in a request, get a mail back, none of that. You are giving consent and you can share your data with someone. Now, given that this is coming years after data has been stored by financial entities and organizations in this country over decades, right? What it does, it opens up a lot of possible use cases. Now, those use cases, the common ones are in terms of helping you do your account verification better and easier. So you had the UPI stack to do that, but now with this, you can give consent, you can know that, okay, this account belongs to this particular person because you are getting the profile information. You have use cases around FNO opening, account opening in the derivative space. You have use cases around loan monitoring. I was talking to someone today and that person was saying that in India, in tier 2 cities, it's very common practice that when people go to apply for a loan, they file for their income tax while they give higher declarations, and then once the loan is sanctioned, they file a revised income tax filing, right? And they will get their loan basis, whatever they filed earlier. Now, all of these are potential cases where the assets or the lending will turn into an NPA. And account aggregator is a great way to figure that out, that what is continuous monitoring. You can monitor the loan. You can see that whether whatever basis which the loan was approved, whether I have a fixed income, whether I'm a SME and I'm getting my revenues, and whatever is the flow in my bank statement, it will be visible. So the potential of fraud is lower there. But I think there are two critical and very interesting things that is possible now with account aggregator. One is again in the area of fraud. So today in mutual funds industry per se, there is close to 15,000 crore rupees which is lying unclaimed, because the identity of the person whose account it is difficult to establish. We believe that now with a single point and through account aggregator journey, I can look at your bank statement, I can look at your mutual fund statement, credit derivative statements, all of that. What is the variance in your profile information across all of these sources, and if there is large variances, if your account numbers are different, it can show up really that is there a potential of fraud happening in your accounts. And I think fraud monitoring and anything around this, right, even use cases which are today happening through World Check, today happening through Pythagoras, all of those use cases around RegTech, around fraud monitoring, they are very, very good use cases for account aggregator. The other ones, as I said, are the normal ones where you can do advisory services. So I think wealth tech is a very new thing in India. We have some form of robo-advisory, different companies doing some work there, but India today does not have a wealth stack, because saving money and saving for long term is not something that we have been taught as well, right? You have been taught to do an LIC, you have been taught to do a FD, but really planning for creation of wealth is not something that is done. And given that with account aggregator, you will have this entire plethora of information available. you can actually create a wealth stack which can help a lot of these companies create better solutions for advisory around wealth. So I think fraud and wealth will be two large sectors where fintechs can focus on, and I think will become very, very large points and very, very large sectors in themselves with account aggregator coming.
Shiva, Apps Flyer helps startups or say fintech startups optimize their top of funnel. How a startup can leverage that data and optimize their growth and scale?
I will probably give you a scenario when we had a meeting with one of the fintech startups. My first question to them was, where all do you advertise? And they were like, we advertise in multiple different sources, and we also have a decent traffic that would come onto our MWeb. And the following question was, how many of users who come to your MWeb organically download your app? Because this is a data that is usually, which is falling through the cracks, and the growth marketer is actually spending money and effort to bring these users are being tagged as organic. The moment you look them as organic, you say, you know what, I'm already getting these users, why do I need to even run these campaigns? So this is, again, the users that are usually coming from these MWeb campaigns are more potential because, one, they've come to your page and they've read about what your services are and decided to download the app. There is much more higher intent than a user who is directly downloading from a paid campaign. We have also seen the tendency of these users making the first transaction is usually higher. So these, again, example of a data point that is not being stored and the data that we actually give. Second, we have all been talking about retargeting, but again, probably to the audience here, if you run a retargeting campaign, vis-a-vis if you don't run a retargeting campaign, you know how many of your customers would organically make that move or purchase or event that you are actually aiming that retargeting campaign to do, right? So there is a delta that we need to understand before we decide that we have to do this retargeting campaign, and what is the incremental delta uplift that we actually get if we are doing this vis-a-vis if we don't. So there are micro data points that we help our advertisers to understand, analyze, and then decide what they want to do. But end of the day, we are all moving towards a privacy-centric world. Today, we have the luxury of using user-level data for every analytics that we want to perform, or even if we want to run predictive modelings. But Apple has already taken a step towards it by limiting the user to decide whether they want to be tracked. Facebook has made changes last year where the data is being partially shared. Google has announced its plans for Sandbox, which could potentially remove the user level information. So we, being in the center of the ecosystem, we have been helping advertisers to understand the user level and raw data. But at the same time, we are also moving towards those segments where there is a future where you don't have this data, but end of the day, you can still make data-driven decisions to run and scale your campaigns.
So Gino, at Sandbird, you work with multiple fintech startups. Can you pick one example of a fintech startup where you have worked and you have created immense value for that startup?
Yeah, sure. I can give you not one, actually, I can give you a couple of examples, but the one which is closest to me and to the audience would be Paytm, because they are one of our oldest customers. And I think when they started, and it's a growth story, it's a scale story. I'm not saying the growth of Paytm, but the way they do the outreach to their customer sections and then how to make the transactions more social. So they initially started with sending notifications. So basically all the notifications that you got during your COVID times were all sent using this, powered by Sandbird. So notifications is one aspect of the whole thing, which they started with. Then they moved on to the social payment, and I am pretty much sure that most of the people in the room are using sending money option to your friends, to your family, and that's the vision which Paytm had. They picked up that vision and they said that we want, and I was talking about it, that it should be a the transaction should have a social touch to it. It shouldn't be just a transaction. I'm sending a number to a phone number. I'm sending it to my mother. I'm sending it to my friend. It has to be very clear, and that psychology inside you creates more stickability to the platform. So that's Paytm. Paytm is going quite high. Even now, I think they are sending around 70 lakh notifications using Sendbird platform today. That's what their numbers are per day, I'm talking about. The other example I want to take is of PicPay from Brazil. I quoted them earlier. They started with us, and they are again one of our oldest customers, older than Paytm. Now these guys, they had a very clear view that we will stick onto a social mechanism of engaging our customers, because they had a study which said that if I have somebody looking at my transactions, or in fact what they have done is in their app, if let's say Shiva is my peer or in my peer group or my friend, he or somebody else can actually see what I am being doing. So what kind of transactions I have been doing, or what kind of spends I have been doing. Like if I'm spending on tech gadgets, I'm spending on vacations, and what kind of vacations I have been going to. So looking at, the reason they wanted to do that is they want those kind of transactions to be directed. And that's a social effect. The trust comes because they know that, oh, and it's not only for the platform, by the way, for PicPay, it's all the vendors who are there, and then look at the kind of marketing that you can get from them, the marketing, segmented marketing for those particular customers for them. So these are the two examples, but I would also like to give a few other in terms of, data was a question you asked, and I want to quote something around data. Now if you see, when people communicate, when they chat, there is a lot of unstructured data here, which is heavily underused, heavily underutilized, sorry. People say, why do you need chat in my app? I can use SMS, I can use WhatsApp, third party, or emails. Now the thing is, when you use WhatsApp, when you use SMSs, you are definitely under the purview of regulations, and third party regulations like WhatsApp or Facebook can create their own boundaries, Google can create their own boundaries. When you have in-app chat, remember that this data is with you. Of course, you are under the regulations of the regulator or the central banks, but this data is always with you. You can take out this data, you can slice and dice this data to find what your customer wants today, what they want tomorrow, and what they will be wanting in the near future ahead of you. So that's very important in terms of having this kind of an ecosystem that you build as you are growing and scaling. May not be when you are engaging in the early stages, but definitely when you are growing and scaling.
So Mendu, at CAMS, you collaborate with multiple startups. So how do you help them get to the market faster, help them in their GTM? If you can share some ideas around that.
So, as CAMS, we have the largest repository for mutual funds in this country, right? In terms of data, and all of that is important for the fintechs. Given that our position is such that all transactions have to come to us, the tech or the fintechs usually are not very people heavy organizations, so they depend on the ability of ours to provide them easily integrable solutions. So what CAMS has done is, we have this platform called MF Central, which is basically a integrated platform amongst both the RTAs, and through that platform, fintech can just integrate with the MF Central APIs and can become a source of transactions for mutual funds for the entire ecosystem. So the idea is to make this journey easy, right? So just to give you one example, a purchase transactions in mutual funds can potentially have 160 fields. Now, if somebody who is not an SME in mutual funds, for them to understand that is very, very difficult, that what value to pass in each of these fields. So what we have done is we have created very simple APIs, which are wrapper APIs on our core platform. And we have given a sandbox to people so that they can test, they can understand, they can do it themselves, and then they can become participants in the mutual fund ecosystem. So the idea is to enable them through tech so that the layer of SME-ship in capital markets is abstracted. they can focus on the tech part of it, and they can become, a active source of transactions for the ecosystem. That's one, right? The second is, again, we do a lot of work with fintechs around making them understand processes. Now, what happens is, for a fintech, for you to understand the different nuances, because again, as Ginu said, right, the customer support is critical, but nobody wants to invest a lot in that. But if, let's say, you are sourcing 100 transactions and 10 of them are failing, you will have a very, very large customer support team trying to answer all those questions. Now, the idea is to make sure that how do I reduce your failure rates? Now, again, we do a lot of work with fintechs to help them understand why are their transactions failing, again, through technology, so that they can take care of them in their platform and make sure that, the transactions are more smoother, better, easier, faster. The third part, and where we want to work with fintechs, right, is one area around data. Now, what happens is, all mutual funds today in this country have a lot of first-party data, which is data around transactions, let's say failures, their behavior in terms of changing address, changing names, tax status, all of that, right? But marrying this data with outside signals is an area of, potential business which is not being explored a lot today. What I mean by that is, everybody talks about goal-based investing. There are n number of signals that a user is dropping on the internet, but collating those signals to create a richer persona of an investor, so that the investor ends up really doing goal-based investing. Because you know that I'm looking to go for a vacation, you know that I want to aspire to buy a better car. All these signals are there, out there in the market, but today not a lot of work is happening there. And I think that is one place where we would, as CAMS, like to collaborate with fintechs, where if we can use the first party data that is available with the third party data that is available out there to create richer investor personas that will help people create better investment decisions. Now, I will just add the account aggregator piece. So now you have data around mutual funds, you have transaction data across the entire capital markets and financial sector. If you integrate all of that with this third party data, the potential of really driving good investment decisions is immense, and I think that's a large scope for fintechs to explore. And I would urge this audience to pick up a few of them, and we can work together and really create differentiated solutions in this ecosystem.
Thank you, Shwendu. So now we can open the floor for questions from the audience.